When I didn't understand what emotional flashbacks were, I literally thought I was going crazy because I could be in a store and I could feel so grounded and so in my body and so normal. And then something would happen. Maybe it was a person's tone of voice. Maybe it was somebody's expression, a song, a smell. It could have been anything. So many normal and non-threatening things would happen, and suddenly a switch would go off in my body. And suddenly I wasn't myself. Suddenly I was full of panic, or I was detached and I didn't know where I went. I certainly was not in my body at that moment. And when I didn't understand this, I had the pain and the suffering of the trauma that I went through that was left unhealed in my body. And then I have the trauma because of having the trauma, which was the emotional flashbacks that were the result of the unhealed trauma. And it was really, really difficult to work through. So today I want to normalize what emotional flashbacks are. If we don't understand it, it can feed beliefs like there's something wrong with me, I'm crazy, and I'm broken. And we don't want to do that. Those painful beliefs, if you have them, were inflicted by somebody outside of you. And the last thing we want to do is internalize it and then strengthen beliefs that really have nothing to do with us in the first place. So that being said, let's talk about the science of emotional flashbacks. And let's dive in. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Michele. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner and the founder of the School of Transformation, which is where I meet live on Zoom every week and I do the inner work with survivors from all over the world of childhood trauma together. Here on my YouTube channel, we talk about what healing is about, what it looks like, the symptoms of unhealed trauma. But in the School of Transformation, we do the inner healing together. So if you're ready to take the next step, make sure you join me weekly on Zoom. So in somatic experiencing training, there was one practitioner who coined the phrase, and he may not have coined it, but he coined it in my eyes because I had never heard it before. But he used the expression somatic time travel. And when he said that, it really clicked in alignment with emotional flashbacks. Because the way we're designed, it's almost like our body has a built-in time machine. Now, unfortunately, it can't take us to the future, but it can quickly and easily drag you straight into the past, and it can do so without your conscious consent. And that's why the difference between an emotional flashback and a painful or traumatic memory is that when we are talking about a memory, our body is very well aware that we're talking about something in the past. When we're experiencing an emotional flashback, it may be from an event that was from the past and that is not happening now, but to your body is actually reliving it. And it's reliving it at the age when the trauma was originally inflicted. So let's slow things down and talk about exactly what happens at the moment a flashback takes over. And we'll do so step by step so that you can finally understand why this is happening and, more importantly, how to stop it. So remember, emotional flashbacks can feel instantaneous. And that's because your nervous system operates so much faster than your conscious awareness. So as you're going throughout your days, the human brain receives about 11 million bits of information each and every second. But our conscious mind can only process a really tiny fraction of that, around 40 to 50 bits per second. Everything else is processed and stored unconsciously. But then with all that information, your nervous system picks up on a trigger. It might be an external trigger, something in your environment that reminds it of what happened. It doesn't even have to be exactly what happened. If, for example, when you were 2, you were screamed at and then you felt unsafe, well, somebody having a bad day talking on the phone and having a harsh voice can be that external trigger that throws you back to being that 2-year-old helpless and frightened child. But it could also be an internal trigger. And these, let me tell you, these can be confusing and really hard to detect. So an example of this might be, let's say in childhood, I was around a lot of people that shamed me, that invalidated me, that made me feel fear, helpless, right? And maybe it wasn't just one person, it was several people, to the point that maybe there's this painful belief in my body that people are dangerous. And when you're treated that way as a small child, it feels life or death, because the very people that are sending this message of threat are the people that are taking care of you. And so the nervous system's like, if they're not going to take care of me, then I could die because I'm too small to take care of myself, right? So it's a very intense safety belief, or lack of safety belief, I should say. So fast forward, now you're an adult. Let's say you've forgotten all of that because it's compartmentalized, right? You're consciously not even aware of what happened when you were really small. But you walk into a store and there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people that you don't know. And your unconscious registers those unknowns in such a way that you just feel a tiny bit nervous. Like you just notice like, ooh, I'm a little nervous. And then your nervous system notices you nervous and makes the assumption that these people are the same as the people in your childhood, and that the same dangers that existed when you were a child are the same dangers that you're faced with right now. And you go into an emotional flashback thinking that your life is in danger, which is why you might be in an environment that's relatively safe. It's just unknown people. And your body is acting as if you're walking through a minefield. So the first step of an emotional flashback is something in your external or internal environment. Remind your nervous system of a past threat, and your body registers it as a threat in the present as well. Another example of this could be, imagine if you were abandoned as a child, left crying long periods of time in your room, feeling helpless, alone, and abandoned. Well, years later, as an adult, let's say you're in a relationship and your partner doesn't text back for a few hours. Now, to most people, this might be mildly frustrating, but to you, and because of the unhealed wound from the past, it feels unbearable. And your body reacts as if you are that abandoned child right now in this moment. Because to your nervous system, it's not remembering that moment, it's reliving that moment, because your body doesn't recognize time when it comes to unresolved trauma. And so the reason that your body doesn't recognize time is because of what happens with your amygdala. That part of our brain that's responsible for detecting threats, our amygdala, it acts first without our conscious consent. And it doesn't even care if you're actually in danger. The only thing it cares about is one thing. It's like it asks itself this question: does this feel like a past threat? And if for any reason, any part of your body says yes, then everything changes in an instant. Everything suddenly becomes only about survival. And so the very moment that your amygdala detects that threat, real or perceived, it sends a distress signal to all the areas of your brain. Think of it like somebody sees smoke in a building and they pull the fire alarm, and now every part of that building is reacting to that alarm. Well, that's what happens in our brain as well. So this signal reaches a small structure in our brain called our hypothalamus, which then activates our body's emergency response system, which is our sympathetic nervous system, to prepare us for action, whether it's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It mobilizes the body to take action. And so our body is flooded with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. We might have a sharpening of our senses, or we might notice our eyes just darting back and forth, preparing you to take immediate action. Your heart might be beating faster and faster, your muscles tensing and tightening, your breathing becomes shallow, and you're really breathing from your chest. But here's the problem. This is all happening because of a memory, not a real danger. But at that moment, your body doesn't know the difference. Now, here's where things get even more challenging. The exact moment where your amygdala pulls that fire alarm, it also shuts off your thinking brain. Or I should say it hijacks your logical brain, or your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that's responsible for rational thinking, for self-awareness, and for decision making. In other words, the very part of your brain that has the ability to know that it's not happening now, that this is from the past, and that you are relatively safe right now, is offline. And so because that part of your brain is offline, no amount of logic can help you come out of an emotional flashback. No amount of saying to yourself, I'm safe, is going to work because your survival instincts have taken over and they've thrown your conscious self in the trunk. Your survival brain is now in control of your body. So if up until this moment, you have been trying to work through emotional flashbacks by forcing yourself to feel safe or by forcing you to not experience them, and you have not been successful, don't feel bad. It's impossible to learn our way out of emotional flashbacks, and it's impossible to force our body to act outside of its survival instincts when it's detecting threat. Because to your body, these are not just memories. Your body has somatically time traveled to a place in your life where you experienced the abandonment, the fear, the shame, the rejection at the age you were when you experienced it. So for example, if your trauma involved abandonment, you might suddenly feel overwhelming panic when somebody doesn't text you back. Or if your trauma involved feeling powerless, you might shut down completely when someone simply raises their voice, even if it's at someone else. Or if your trauma involved being shamed, you might suddenly feel small and worthless after a tiny, minor mistake. And these reactions, these intense emotions feel real to your nervous system because your nervous system has traveled back to the time where you really experienced and felt these painful emotions. So it's reliving it at that moment. Now, as frustrating as it is when you go into an emotional flashback because you wind up going into a coping skill or trauma response that is outside of who you really are, right? And that could be very frustrating. But I want you to understand that the reason you're going into these coping skills and this trauma response isn't because you're broken. It's because your nervous system is actually doing what it learned to do when you were young to protect you. And when you were young, these trauma responses were probably the only thing that could keep you safe. The problem is now that you're an adult, now they're maladaptive. Two mistakes that people tend to engage in when trying to work through emotional flashbacks. I was guilty of both, so there's no shame in this. Mistake number one is trying to think your way out of it. So when the trigger happens, you might try to tell yourself, this is so stupid, I know I'm safe. And because you know you're safe cognitively, you try to force your body to be on the same page. But here's the thing, the trauma is not stored in your thoughts, it's stored in your body. So the mind is saying, I'm safe, but the body is feeling unsafe. And the more you try to force your body and strong arm it to do what you want it to do through sheer willpower, the more your body is actually going to register you as a threat. The key is about learning to work with your body instead of against it. Mistake number two is trying to suppress the triggers. In other words, maybe they feel the trigger and so the person will try to distract themselves. They'll get really busy. They're actually trying to do so that they don't feel. But what the mind suppresses, the body stores. And so the energy of those suppressed, unprocessed emotions, they just don't evaporate with time. They simply wait until something in your environment wakes them up again and they come flooding up with the same intensity. And I actually just thought of one last mistake that a lot of people make, and trust me, I was so guilty with this one. It's beating yourself for even having and struggling still with emotional flashbacks. This creates toxic shame. To me, shame is one of the biggest barriers to healing. In fact, the more you criticize yourself, the more you berate yourself for reacting this way with emotional flashbacks, the more trauma stays stuck. We have to understand that our body isn't betraying us. It's just trying to protect us the only way it knows how. So hopefully this video helped normalize what's happening in your body if you're experiencing emotional flashbacks. And remember, working through this type of trauma from the past is not easy, and it's very difficult to do alone. So if you're looking to dive deeper on your own recovery journey, I want to invite you to join me live with an amazing group of survivors from all over the world that meet together live on Zoom, and we do the inner work together. It's one thing to watch a video and to learn it up here. It's another to embody what we're learning, and that is difficult to do alone. So I invite you to come check out our live weekly meetings to see if this is something that could help you to deepen your CPTSD recovery journey. But even if you're unable to join us live weekly, I want you to remember that if you've been stuck in the cycle of emotional flashbacks, remember that you are not broken. Your nervous system is not your enemy. It's just doing what it was wired to do to keep you safe. But safety is not about avoiding triggers forever. It's about teaching your body that the danger is over. Healing is possible. Trust me, I've been there. I know the pain of feeling hijacked by the past. But I also know this. With the right tools, with patience, with self-compassion, you can rewire your nervous system and you can find peace. If this resonated with you, hit like and subscribe, and please share your experience in the comments. Let's support each other on this journey because healing really is possible and we don't have to do it alone.